All right, it's Nonfiction November, and I decided that I would just give 20 nonfiction book recommendations in this video. So here we go. The first one I want to talk about is Evicted. This is one of my favorite nonfictions of all time. It is hard to read because of the content and also because you forget you're not reading fiction because it's written in a really great narrative way, but it's real people who are suffering in this book. It takes place in Milwaukee and it looks through the eviction system there in a couple, I think 3 communities. And yeah, you get to see how broken it is. It's really eye-opening, very readable, really difficult. Highly recommend. Well, I should just say I highly recommend all of these because otherwise I'm just going to be saying that a lot. Next up's Killers of the Flower Moon. This is more of a journalistic styled nonfiction, and it's written in I believe it's the 1920s. It's been a couple years since I've read this, but there is a reservation that owns a lot of oil, and a lot of the people on this reservation are being killed for their land. And this is actually the case that started the FBI, at least in the way we know it, and it's exploring what was happening to these people in this tribe. And I'm forgetting the name of the tribe. I'll put it on the screen because I don't want to butcher saying it. But it's really eye-opening because, first of all, you never get told the side of Native American history in our country, and you never get told, actually, these people were essentially billionaires, and because they were billionaires, what these other white people were doing to try and get their resources away from them. It's really difficult, but eye-opening, so I would check it out. We have The Girls of the Atomic City. If you wanted to know what our country was doing behind the scenes in the 40s and 30s to make the atomic bomb, this was one of the cities where we were refining uranium, and it was the work of these women, because a lot of men were off to war, who were running the city, and how they didn't even know what they were doing. It was kind of fascinating. I enjoyed getting to see how they were able to do what they did without knowing what they were doing, and then also just the slice of life of how their lives worked in this time period. There was a lot that I didn't know about World War II in the United States, because I feel like whenever I read a World War II historical fiction or nonfiction, I'm in Europe or I'm in the Pacific, and this was in the United States. I believe this one's in Tennessee, and so the things that were rationed, how people chose to still keep the little things in life even when they couldn't, that was all in this work, and I thought it was really interesting. This next one's Quiet, which was eye-opening to me in a couple ways. One, in that it showed me which ways I am an introvert that I wasn't aware of. I think before reading this work, I would have told you I'm an extrovert. And then reading this, it made me realize I am more in the middle of that spectrum, and it was also really eye-opening about how us in the Western business world really feel like you can only lead if you are an extrovert. Like, you can only be successful if you have these traits that are extrovert traits, and kind of pushes back against that in ways that I thought were really good for me to have in my brain, not only for myself when I'm in these positions, but also when I am in leadership positions or trying to get there, kind of just maneuvering that landscape. So I don't know if it's a perfect nonfiction, but it was really interesting to look at. It helped me contextualize a lot of the world around me. Next up is Range, which I found really cathartic when I read. This is a book about how you don't need to be specialized to be successful or to find the job that is right for you. Being broad in your experiences is actually a benefit. It actually helps you find your specialized task. And, maybe I need to reread that because as I'm job hunting right now, could really use that because it definitely looks at it's the counter argument to kind of the Tiger Woods golf approach of, specialize really young and you'll be successful, similar with chess. And it has some really interesting case studies or anecdotal things that it talks about where broad expertise would have been better than specialized expertise. It's fascinating. There was stuff about how certain heart procedures go by better when there's cardiologist conventions. Something that happened with a NASA situation. It was a really interesting read. I recommend it. Next one's another one of my favorite nonfictions, even though it's hard. This one's hard, and that's Just Mercy. This, every other chapter, you're either following the case of a man on death row, and the person who wrote this book is a lawyer, and the lawyer who ran that case, or you're looking at a different specific injustice in our system, whether that is lifetime imprisonment for children, how women are treated in prisons, etc. And this lawyer has actually gone to the Supreme Court several times, and it changed some of the rulings, and he kind of talks about those things. The movie is based off the chapter of the man on death row, and I haven't seen the movie, and I don't know how the movie ends because I don't know if they changed the ending of the movie, but the ending of the book is very sad. It's not happy. But it's about how they fight against this guy who was so clearly wrongly put on death row, but it is so difficult to reverse that. So, if you want to have your eyes open to very specific ways from a lawyer's perspective, I'd read this, and it's also written in a very accessible way. That's one of my biggest things I like about this nonfiction, is that lawyers, I think, more than anyone else, have a large vocabulary. They really know how grammar works. It's a part of their job. And sometimes that can bleed into how they write, and it can make writing really dense and difficult to read. That was not the case here. I wouldn't say it was narrative all the time, but it was easy for me to consume, and I appreciated that because it let me actually take away the points that I think he was trying to drive home. Next up is about Northern Ireland, and Ireland in, I want to say, the 1960s, late 20th century, and that is Say Nothing. This is, I think, misleading in its marketing, but it's still really worth reading. It's kind of led to believe like a cold case true crime thing, and it's not really that. It does open with like an unsolved death of a mother of many children, but that's not really what it's focused on. It's focusing on the relationships between Ireland and Northern Ireland in this time period, which I've always heard about, but never knew a lot about. And I mean, even now, I'm not an expert, but it was really eye-opening, the different struggles that were happening between these communities. And there was this project that happened because there was this attempt to de-escalate things, and part of that was letting people also then tell their stories without repercussion, so we didn't lose all this history from this moment, because a lot of it was gossip, hearsay. Nothing was written down, nothing was recorded. And so there are all these letters that are actually held in Boston. And that was also a part of this nonfiction and the research behind it. This is the same author as Empire of Pain and other really well-regarded nonfiction works. I need to read more by him because I did like his approach, although it is more journalistic and dry. So if that's an issue with your nonfictions, just know that. The next nonfiction we'll talk about is White Rage. This is more of a history textbook nonfiction, so it's going to be drier, but it's really important, I feel. I think it has basically, I want to say 5 moments in the American history where it basically goes, here is a time when the Black community actually got something, like, say, emancipation. And then it goes, and here's what happened after that, Jim Crow laws. But it goes into more details, and it was difficult, not only because of the writing style being dry, but also the content, but it was eye-opening. There's definitely a lot of stuff that, like, I thought I knew, but I didn't know the extent of, and if you really weren't taught anything like this because of wherever you grew up in the United States, it's eye-opening. So I even gave this to my mom because, I mean, a lot of it discusses stuff that she wouldn't have been taught in class because it was the 20th century when she was just living. It wasn't in a history textbook yet. So highly recommend that. Up next is Disfigured, which is a good introductory text to disability nonfiction. This specifically looks at disability representation in fairy tales that we all grew up with some memoir story-like qualities from the author herself because she is disabled. I haven't put too many memoirs on this list because I feel like that could be its own list, but this was really fascinating, especially for me as a reader, because I've been trying to become better at catching ableism, which I'm still not very good at, but seeing what tropes are most commonly used and harmful in fairy tales was useful for me. So definitely recommend it as an introductory work. Next up is another race nonfiction, and that is Caste. This is very popular, very accessible. I do recommend it, especially if you have people in your life who are maybe more moderate but still don't understand the conversations that are happening. I think her argument of a caste system is a really great way to give it to the white people in your life, essentially. I don't know if this is necessarily for people in marginalized communities. I think it definitely rehashes stuff that people have already learned in other locations, but this book was well done and I think good for an introductory audience. I actually do have a discussion for this with Jess Owens. This is one of the books we read for Book Community, so I'll link that down below. Actually, a couple of these will be Book Community discussions, so I will link all of those down below. Next up is 100 Years of War. This is a Palestinian nonfiction. This is also one of those more drier historical nonfiction, so like written like a history textbook is what I mean when I say that. But it was eye-opening to me. And I mean, it's written by someone who is pro-Palestine. So like all nonfictions, like everything I've said here, they're like, it's like when you write an essay for school, you have a thesis you are trying to prove with your work. And so this was a really, I think, this is really informative. I really liked seeing the past 100 years, specific events that had happened that I knew nothing about. Even just when Israel became a nation, those sort of things. I recommend it. I think it's good to have this perspective on that situation. I'm still I'm still always working on increasing my knowledge on other parts of the world in general, but this was a good introductory starting point for me. This next one is the one memoir that I put on here. Actually, no, I put 2 memoirs. Yes, is that the only 2? Yes. This is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is my favorite memoir, so it had to be on the list. This is about the author's abusive relationship with her girlfriend. And it's written in a very unique vignette, multimedia-ish way, and it's difficult. It's very fragmented, and I really loved it. And it's also one of the few memoirs of its time that is showing abuse in a lesbian relationship, which I do think is important. She even talks about how she wrote it to fill that void in the canon of literature for the queer community. And this next one is another one of my favorite nonfictions, and that's Braiding Sweetgrass. This is the type of climate nonfiction that I needed in my life, because it's about a relationship with the land that is sustainable. It's very reflective. This is a very reflective piece. The author is a botanist and a teacher and a mother, and she's Indigenous, and all of that comes together. This has memoir-like qualities, but it also goes into her spiritual beliefs, her knowledge as a scientist. That's all in here. None of it can be separated from each other. And I really enjoy it. I need to reread it. I'm thinking of slowly rereading a chapter a day after my mom finishes it, because it was a book that I loved so much that I gave to my mom to read. I do that a lot with nonfiction I like. Every nonfiction that I've said is my favorite nonfiction my entire family has read. And now we'll get into my other memoir that I have on here, and that's All You Can Ever Know. I put this memoir on here because the author is adopted, and she talks about her life being adopted as Asian by a white family, and what that was like, even though she loves her parents, and then what it was like to discover and meet her birth mother while she was pregnant and about to have her own child. I thought a lot of that was informative, especially as someone who thinks about if I will adopt in the future. And there's a lot I don't know about the history of adoption, and seeing what this type of older school adoption was like for this woman, and what it was like for someone who is from a marginalized community being raised by someone in a privileged community. Though there are things that people, I think, used to just be like, we don't see color, we don't think about that, of course we love her. And that's kind of not the point, right? And so there was a lot that I think was discussed in a really nuanced and informative way. And I thought it was a really well-written memoir. This next one's a new one that I haven't had a discussion with Jess yet, but it should be on the horizon. I think it's going to be the weekend after you see that, and that is Ace. This is great introductory work on asexuality. I say that as someone who really, I don't think, understood the definition before I read it, and then realized maybe I'm demisexual. This is another nonfiction that taught me stuff about myself, so really, really informative. I think this author does a really good way of being like, this is an introductory work. I am not trying to exclude other definitions because this is not a monolith community. And I appreciated it. I really enjoyed it. This also has memoir qualities because the author herself is asexual. So I really recommend it. Up next is another book I read this year, and that's Undocumented Americans. This one's hard. This one's so hard to read. It's so short, but it's so difficult. The author herself is undocumented with DACA, and she chooses to write about the stories of people in the community who are undocumented but are not DACA recipients. And there's sections about first responders for 9/11 and people who live in New York. There's just deportations and story of people seeking asylum. There's just everyday life of how do they handle doctor bills and getting the care they need. And it's difficult because, I'm very close to immigration troubles. I don't get to see half my family most of the time because they're from a South American country, and this is America. We only accept a certain type of America here. And it's difficult because I don't agree with a lot of what we do in this country, and getting to see the tangible human results of what that does to people. So yeah, it's very illuminating and difficult. Up next, we'll just do these two together because I read them together and I think they complement each other well, and that's Gates of Europe and Red Famine. This is about Ukraine, both of them. Gates of Europe is history, nonfiction, so very factual. Lots of names, dates, figures. So there's many maps about basically BC era of this region up to, I I want to say 2015, maybe now they did add a chapter for like nowadays because of what's been happening. And you get to see the landscape of that land, how it was changed, who owned what were the political and religious tensions. I thought it was really informative and paired well with Red Famine, which takes place primarily the 20th century. It focuses a lot in the 30s, but it does kind of actually bring us up to date. And it does really quickly in the intro kind of do what The Gates of Europe is doing for 300 pages. And it's about how the Soviet Union basically caused a famine. Like, there were many famines, but there was one in particular that their negligence or maybe actual policy decisions caused. And so, yeah, both were really informative. I enjoyed the writing style of Red Famine more than a lot of my friends. I thought it was actually pretty narrative in its framework, but just know that not everyone has the same experience there. And then these last two also kind of pair well together. We did all of these, I think, Red Famine, Gates of Europe, and these next two we did book communities on. But Mediocre, this is a very provocative title. I really enjoyed this one. It was very cathartic in how someone was speaking my rage to me. I don't know if it would help change people's mind, if that's its purpose, but in terms of me needing someone to tell me why the world is screwed up, yes, I enjoyed a lot of the stories. I still think about a lot of the anecdotes that she threw in there, especially about like this one football team owner, the stuff about Buffalo Bill. There's a lot of moments where she highlights things. I'm talking about women who are given positions at company right when they're about to fail, like the glass cliff or something like that. There were a lot of interesting things that I knew about, but got to contextualize in this work. And then the last one I'll talk about is Hood Feminism. I liked this. I do think at this point, this is one of the later race nonfiction I have read. Maybe it was one of the more recent ones. Like, this was after White Rage, Caste, Mediocre, things like that. And I think this one's really good in terms of, like, being intersectional. But it did rehash a lot of stuff I had already read before. So this is also kind of an introductory race nonfiction. So I would recommend it earlier in your reading than later. But I do think you should still read it because it definitely has a perspective that wasn't in the other ones that I have mentioned. And it's still pretty short, so it's not like too much time, and it's written in a very conversational way, similar to Mediocre. And that, my friends, are 20 nonfiction books that I recommend you read from a whole range. Hopefully you find something you like to read this month or throughout the next year. Let me know nonfiction that you love, that you think I should read. I actually forgot one. I'm just going to mention it real quick, but it's Radium Girls. Oh, I love Radium Girls. It makes me angry, though. It makes me angry. This is about early 20th century America and how we knew but didn't care that radium was radioactive and was killing women who were making watches. And it's a good thing that they fought, because if they didn't fought, the 40s with the atomic bomb might have been very, very different. But it's rage-inducing, so just know that. So technically 21 recommendations, but I couldn't not mention Radium Girls because I actually really love that one. But it made me rage. And I'm really scared of radiation. So there were also moments where I was like, yeah. Anyways, now let me know what nonfiction you would recommend to me down in the comments. If you want to leave an emoji. Oh, is there a radiation-based emoji? There has to be something, right? And if not, maybe just like a scientific test tube or something like that. Something in that vein. And like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.